The stars hung like frozen embers over the dark edge of space as the transport ship glided silently through the void, its engines humming with a soft, controlled rhythm that betrayed no emotion. Inside, rows of armored Terran soldiers sat in silence, their faces calm but their eyes sharp, trained to see what others could not. At the front of the ship, the captain stood near the viewport, watching the faint blue light of the alien world growing larger with every passing second. It wasn't just another world. It was a colony that had tested humanity's patience for the last time. The Galactic Council had pleaded for calm. The alien rulers had promised compliance, but one defiant voice had echoed through their transmissions. A young alien princess who believed humanity could be mocked without consequence. Her words weren't just defiance. They were a challenge, a spark thrown into dry grass. What she didn't know was that humanity had learned long ago to keep its fury hidden, like a blade waiting in the shadows. The first transmission came on a night when the stars were silent, and the council chamber was filled with whispers. She stood before the Galactic Council, tall and radiant, with silver-blue skin shimmering beneath the light of the floating orbs. Her voice was sharp, almost musical, but behind it was arrogance, the kind that came from centuries of believing her kind could never be challenged. She called humanity a primitive species with too much bark and no bite. The aliens laughed with her. The council did nothing. But far across the void, deep beneath the black steel halls of a Terran war bunker, someone replayed her words over and over. Humanity didn't rage with noise. It moved with silence. And in that silence, plans were made. The drop pods entered the alien atmosphere like falling stars, fire trailing behind them as they sliced through the clouds. On the surface below, the alien capital city glittered with towers of crystal and silver, proud and untouchable. The alien girl, princess of her kind, stood on a balcony with a smirk, watching the bright lights descend. She thought it was a show, a warning, another meaningless human gesture. But when the first pod struck the ground, the shockwave shook the entire district, sending crystal walls trembling. Within seconds, thousands of Terran boots hit the streets. The sound was like thunder rolling through the veins of the city. No speeches, no warnings. Humanity didn't come to talk this time. They came to end the lesson she had started. She tried to rally her people, raising her voice across every broadcast channel. Her silver eyes burned with pride as she called humanity cowards, unfit to rule among the stars. But the Terrans didn't respond. Their ships formed a silent iron halo around the planet, cutting off every escape route, sealing the skies. The alien fleet tried to launch, but their ships never cleared the ground. Terran gravity clamps locked them in place like toys in the hands of giants. The council scrambled, sending messages of diplomacy, urging humanity to show restraint. But restraint had been shown already. Decades of warnings, treaties, and broken promises. This was not cruelty. This was consequence. In the capital square, the princess stood as the Terran soldiers advanced, their black armor gleaming under the alien sun, their visors cold and unreadable. She expected shouting, a grand speech, some negotiation. But the human commander simply walked forward, his boots echoing across the shattered crystal tiles. He removed his helmet slowly, revealing a face that carried no hatred, only resolve. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken warnings. "We told you," he said softly. "Humanity doesn't bark." Then the fleet above shifted, and a soft rumble grew across the city as power grids went dark one by one. The aliens watched their proud towers dim like dying stars. Their defenses crumbled not with fire, but with silence. Humanity had already taken everything, communications, control, hope, before stepping onto their soil. The princess tried to fight. She ordered her guards to attack, but their weapons jammed mid-aim, their systems overridden by Terran AI before they could even fire. The humans didn't need to scream their dominance. They showed it with precision. One by one, the alien elite were rounded up, not killed, but made to witness their empire bend. Terran dropships soared overhead, delivering supplies not to their enemies, but to the alien civilians. Humanity wasn't there to destroy a people. They were there to teach a ruler what defiance costs. The civilians began to understand. They saw the difference between a ruler who mocked power and a species that became power. As the sun set, the princess found herself on her knees in the center of her own palace courtyard. Around her, the Terran flag stood beside the alien crest, not replacing it but towering higher. The commander knelt before her, not in mockery, but in cold truth. "You thought humanity was a story told to scare children," he whispered. "But we are not the story. We are the ending." She had never felt small before, never felt her voice shake, but now the world itself seemed to have turned its back on her arrogance. For the first time, she understood that power wasn't loud. It was quiet, unstoppable, patient, and merciless when provoked. The council tried to intervene, sending desperate pleas to Terran command. But the humans didn't answer right away. They let the silence stretch, let the galaxy feel the weight of what happens when you spit into the storm. And when humanity finally responded, it was with a single message broadcast to every system in the council's network. Respect is earned. Defiance is answered. No more, no less. That message spread across star systems like a cold wind, and entire empires that had laughed at humanity before began to whisper in fear. The lesson wasn't just for one alien girl, it was for the entire galaxy. The war never happened. It never needed to. Humanity's power wasn't measured in battles fought, but in the wars they never had to wage. They stood above the stars not as conquerors, but as the unmovable force others feared to push against. The alien princess, once arrogant, became a voice for peace. Her name a reminder carved into the history of her people of the day when humanity didn't yell. It acted. Her empire rebuilt under Terran oversight, stronger, wiser, humbled. And in that silence, the galaxy learned what it truly meant to awaken the sleeping wolf. Thank you for listening to this HFY sci-fi story. If you enjoyed this cinematic journey through humanity's power and the lesson that echoed through space, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more epic stories. Your support keeps the galaxy turning, and more adventures are on their way. The alien sky burned like a wounded star as Terran fleet formations glided through the void above the capital world, their black hulls reflecting the crimson glow of the twin suns. The world below trembled under the silent storm, though not a single shot had yet been fired. The alien girl stood in her marble tower wrapped in silver silk robes, staring at the growing darkness in orbit. Her people, once proud and loud, began to feel something they had never felt before: true fear. She clenched her jaw, unwilling to let it show, unwilling to believe that humanity would actually follow through with their warnings. All her life she had grown up hearing stories of the humans. Primitive creatures, fragile, too emotional to last in the cold expanse of space. Her tutors had mocked Terran strategy. Her military advisors had dismissed Terran ships as outdated metal beasts that lacked elegance. But as those black warships blocked out the sun, she began to understand that elegance meant nothing when standing beneath a predator's shadow. The Galactic Council had begged her to apologize, but arrogance had been her shield. Now that shield felt paper-thin against the silent weight pressing down from orbit. The Terran flagship hung directly over the capital like a silent hammer, a monstrous vessel longer than the entire alien palace district. Its engines pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of something ancient and patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. Below, the city's defense arrays hummed nervously, their energy readings spiking and faltering as Terran jamming waves wrapped around the planet like an invisible fist. The alien generals paced across their control room, barking orders that no one could execute. Every command was met with system errors, their once mighty defense network flickering out like dying stars. The alien girl's advisors tried to hide their panic, whispering that perhaps this was just a show of force, that humanity would back down under diplomatic pressure. But she saw it in their eyes. They didn't believe their own words. And deep down, neither did she. Then came the moment that cracked the air like thunder. The first Terran drop fleet entered the upper atmosphere, a coordinated descent that painted the sky with streaks of fire. The alien capital shook as the sonic booms rolled across the city, windows shattering, alarms screaming. Every broadcast channel was hijacked at once. the alien girl's own palace screens filling with a single image, the Terran insignia, a cold, unblinking emblem of iron resolve. There was no threat spoken, no ultimatum, just silence. That silence was louder than any weapon. Civilians poured into the streets, their elegant robes dragging through the dust as they stared up at the fiery sky. For centuries, their empire had stood untouched, proud, believing themselves superior to the scattered humans who had once barely survived their own wars. Now those same humans had arrived not as diplomats, but as the storm. Inside the War Council chamber, the alien girl slammed her fist on the glowing table, the impact cracking the glassy surface. Her silver-blue skin flushed darker with anger. She demanded a counterattack. She ordered their fleets to rise. But the holographic commander stammered, his hands shaking as he explained that the ships were locked to the ground, their engines refusing to ignite under the Terran gravity suppression fields. Their fighter drones were unresponsive. Their rail cannons were frozen. Their orbital defenses had been turned to glass metaphorically because Terrans hadn't even fired a shot. The alien girl shouted, accusing him of cowardice, but the terror in his eyes told her it wasn't cowardice. It was reality. Humanity had come prepared, not with brute force alone, but with precision, a kind of cold efficiency that came from centuries of watching, learning, and building. The Galactic Council sent another desperate transmission to the humans, their ambassadors appearing as holograms in orbit above the Terran flagship's command bridge. They spoke of peace, of restraint, of negotiations. But the Terran admiral simply stared back, silent, his hands clasped behind his back, the stars reflecting off his cold steel armor. He didn't need to speak. The humans had spoken 100 times before. This was the moment they stopped talking. One by one, the council ambassadors faded from the feed, realizing that no amount of diplomacy could bend what had already solidified in Terran intent. Down on the planet, the alien girl's heart pounded as her control slipped like sand through her fingers. The palace guard surrounded her, waiting for her orders, but for the first time she had none. The Terran dropships broke through the final layer of clouds like a swarm of obsidian daggers, their engines roaring as they descended in perfect formation. The capital's grand avenues, once used for parades and celebrations, were now lit by the fiery glow of their landing thrusters. Soldiers poured out, black armor gleaming, moving with terrifying discipline. There was no shouting, no chaos, no confusion. Each movement was calculated, each squad acting like a single living organism. The alien citizens watching from balconies felt their chests tighten, their knees weaken, not from violence but from the crushing realization that they were looking at a species that did not need to prove itself anymore. Humanity had already become the storm. The alien girl rushed to the palace balcony, her hair whipping against the wind as she stared down at the advancing soldiers. Her voice, amplified across the city, echoed with defiance as she shouted, "You think you can command us? You think you can break us? Humanity is nothing but a whisper compared to the roar of our empire." Her words scattered across the city like shards of glass. But below, the soldiers didn't stop. They didn't even look up. Her voice, once worshipped, now meant nothing against the sound of Terran boots crushing her marble roads. She felt fury boil in her chest, but beneath that fury something new stirred: doubt. It was a quiet, cold doubt that slipped through her veins like ice. For the first time, she wasn't sure if they could win. The human commander stepped through the smoke, his visor reflecting the trembling lights of the alien city. His presence was heavy, not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. The alien guards hesitated, weapons trembling in their hands as their targeting systems flashed red with failure warnings. The alien girl's advisors whispered frantically, urging her to retreat, to surrender, to call for more council intervention. But she refused to bow. She lifted her chin high, clinging to the only thing she still had left, her pride. But as the Terran fleet spread across the sky and her world dimmed beneath it, that pride felt small and fragile. The Terrans moved with the patience of hunters who already had their prey cornered. They didn't destroy, they dismantled. The palace gates didn't explode. They opened, overridden by Terran command codes that slipped through their security like blades through silk. The soldiers didn't storm in with rage. They walked in with the calm of victors who had already won before the battle began. As the alien girl stared at them from the top of the marble stairs, her hands clenched into fists, she realized the most frightening truth of all. Humanity wasn't loud. Humanity didn't need to be. And in their silence, her empire was already kneeling. She whispered to herself, "This can't be happening." But it was. And outside her palace, millions of her people were watching it too. The mighty alien empire, the one that once laughed at the idea of human power, now found itself under a shadow it couldn't push away. The alien girl's voice faltered for the first time. The storm had arrived, and it wasn't here to ask. It was here to teach, and lessons from humanity were never gentle. The air in the capital was thick, heavy with the smell of scorched ozone and trembling fear, even though not a single Terran weapon had fired. The alien girl stood at the top of the palace staircase, her pulse pounding like a war drum in her ears as the first column of Terran soldiers advanced through the gates, their formation tight, flawless, their boots hitting the marble in perfect rhythm. The alien palace had seen emperors crowned, armies blessed, fleets launched, but never had its halls felt this cold, this silent, this absolute. The black armored soldiers moved like a shadow cutting through light, their helmets reflecting the burning sky behind them. Every step they took stripped away another layer of the alien girl's illusion of control. She wanted to scream. She wanted to order them out. But her voice, once enough to command entire fleets, now trembled against the weight of silence. In the plaza below, thousands of alien civilians had gathered, their faces pale, their bodies pressed close together. They had always believed their empire was untouchable, a shining jewel among the stars. But now the sky was no longer theirs. The Terran fleet above hovered like an executioner's blade, black and quiet, cutting off the sun and the hope beneath it. The alien defense forces had long since abandoned their posts, not out of cowardice, but because there was nothing left to defend. Their weapons didn't work. Their ships couldn't launch. Their systems were no longer theirs. Humanity hadn't crushed their walls with brute force. It had taken their breath away with precision. The alien girl's generals whispered desperately behind her, begging for guidance. But she could feel their fear too. She could see it in the way their hands shook, in the way they avoided her eyes. They didn't believe in victory anymore. They only feared the inevitable. And then the Terran commander stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in matte black armor that seemed to swallow the light around him. He moved with the kind of quiet that came not from hesitation but from dominance. His visor reflected the alien girl's palace, making her look small in his shadow. He raised a single hand, not a weapon, just a gesture, and the entire Terran column froze in perfect unison. No sound, no breath, only power. That single, calm movement carried more authority than all of her shouting ever could. The alien girl's throat tightened. This was what the council had warned her about. This was the silence of a predator that didn't need to roar to remind the galaxy what it was capable of. "Bring the palace guards," she snapped at her generals, forcing her voice to steady, trying to cling to whatever scraps of authority she had left. But when the guards arrived, they didn't march. They stumbled. Their once shining armor flickered with static as Terran signal interference disrupted their suits. Their rifles powered on, then immediately shorted out, sparks dancing across their grips. One guard fell to his knees trying to reboot his weapon system. The others stared at the advancing humans with hollow eyes. They knew they were useless, but they stood anyway because standing was all they could do. She could see the terror behind their visors. She hated it. She hated them for being weak. She hated herself for realizing she was weaker still. The Terran commander stopped at the foot of the stairs. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't threaten. He simply looked up at her, his expression unreadable behind that visor, but the weight of it pressed against her chest like a mountain. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, yet it filled the courtyard like thunder, low and steady. "Your words have consequences." That was all he said. No long speech, no justification, just truth. The alien girl gritted her teeth, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to shout back, to remind him who she was, the princess of the Varan Dominion, daughter of the Emperor, future ruler of 1,000 systems. But the words caught in her throat because even she no longer believed them. The council's transmission panels flared to life along the palace walls, their holograms flickering as the ambassadors shouted over one another, desperate to stop what was unfolding. They pleaded with the Terran commander for mercy, for restraint, for another chance at peace. But the Terrans ignored them. Their communications had already been muted. Humanity wasn't negotiating anymore. They had done that for decades. And now, their silence was the last language anyone would hear. One of the alien generals stumbled forward, trying to speak on behalf of the princess, his voice shaking as he called out for a ceasefire. The Terran commander tilted his head slightly. "There is no fire to cease," he replied. And in that moment, everyone realized just how deep the humans had already won. The alien girl took a step down the marble stairs, her silver robes dragging against the cracked floor. She raised her chin high, forcing her fear down, feeding herself the lies she had grown up with. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "You think your silence scares us? We will never kneel to you." Her voice cracked at the end, just slightly, but enough. The commander didn't respond. He just kept looking at her. And that silence, sharp, calm, absolute, cut through her more than any blade ever could. The crowd below felt it too. A whisper began to spread through them, quiet and fearful, like dry leaves stirring before a storm. Some turned their eyes away. Others lowered their heads. No one spoke in her defense. Then it happened. The Terran fleet shifted position in orbit. Slowly, deliberately, the massive shadow grew darker over the capital. A distant hum began to vibrate through the ground. One by one, the alien city's power grids began to collapse. Towers that had once glowed with white light flickered, then died, plunging entire districts into darkness. The streets went silent. The alien girl's palace lights dimmed. Her people looked up at their once shining capital, now a husk under the weight of Terran control. Humanity didn't need to burn their cities to the ground to break them. They just needed to remind them how fragile they really were. The alien girl's breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. She wanted to run, to hide, to scream. But all she could do was stand there and watch as her world fell quiet. This wasn't just a military defeat. This was something far more terrifying. It was the moment when a civilization realized it wasn't the center of the galaxy anymore. The Terran commander stepped onto the first stair, slowly climbing upward. No one tried to stop him. Her guards stepped back without being ordered to. Her generals looked down at the ground. And for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be on the wrong side of history. He reached the top step, close enough that she could see her own reflection in his visor. Her heart pounded. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to be the leader her people thought she was. But her lips trembled, and her hands shook. The commander leaned slightly closer, his voice low and steady. "You thought humanity was a story told to frighten children," he said. "But stories don't stand at your door." She flinched as if struck, not by his tone, but by the quiet certainty of it. Behind him, thousands of Terran soldiers stood ready, unmoving, unstoppable. And behind them, the weight of humanity itself, patient, relentless, and terrifyingly calm. She stared back at him, trying to find any sign of mercy, but there was none. There was only that cold, unwavering gaze. And in that gaze, she finally saw the truth. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about conquest. This was the universe reminding her that arrogance has a price, and humanity always collects its debts. The plaza below fell into absolute silence, not because anyone commanded it, but because the very air seemed to demand it. In that silence, her pride cracked like glass under the weight of a hammer. She knew now this was no bluff. This was the beginning of the lesson humanity had come to teach. And lessons from humanity were never gentle, never forgotten, and always written in silence. The palace gates stood wide open, their silver arches trembling under the quiet weight of the Terran occupation. The alien girl could hear the faint metallic echo of Terran boots spreading through the halls where her ancestors had once walked like gods, where parades were held for victories that now felt like distant lies. The soldiers moved deeper into the heart of the palace, their formation flawless, their breathing controlled, their black armor reflecting the fading lights of the capital. Outside, the twin suns bled into the horizon, their crimson glow spilling across the city like a wound. It was a sunset that her people would never forget. The day their pride was ripped away not with fire, not with war, but with a silence that crushed louder than 1,000 cannons. She stood frozen at the top of the grand staircase as the Terran commander stepped closer, his presence as heavy as the sky itself. Behind him, the Terran flag was raised, not above the alien crest, but beside it, perfectly level yet somehow towering higher in its quiet power. That single action cut through the alien court like a blade. No declarations, no threats, just presence. Humanity didn't need to scream its dominance. It let the world feel it. Her generals, who once swore their lives to her throne, shifted uncomfortably, their heads lowered, their eyes refusing to meet hers. The palace guards had already laid down their useless rifles, their systems overridden. Their armor, once symbols of strength, now looked like costumes in front of the Terran soldiers who didn't even bother to draw their weapons, because they didn't have to. Inside the grand chamber, the alien council of advisors sat in silence around the glowing crystal table. They were trembling. She could smell their fear in the cold air. They had been there when she mocked humanity, laughing at their fragile little worlds and their rusted fleets. They had cheered her speeches, called her brave, called her brilliant. But none of them were laughing now. Their empire had fallen not through a glorious battle, but in a single day, through a storm they had invited with their arrogance. One of the older advisors finally spoke, his voice hoarse and cracking. "We must surrender," he whispered, "for the sake of the people." His words hung in the air like smoke. She slammed her hand on the table, the crack of her palm echoing through the room. "We are Varen," she hissed. "We do not kneel." But her voice felt smaller than it had ever been. Even she could hear the desperation in it. The Terran commander entered the chamber then, his steps slow, deliberate, like someone walking through a conquered memory. His soldiers took positions along the walls, not aiming their weapons, just standing there like a living wall of inevitability. He removed his helmet, revealing a calm, unshaken face with sharp eyes that held no hatred, only the cold weight of purpose. "Princess," he said, his voice steady, neither cruel nor kind, "you've made your choices. Humanity is here to make sure you understand the cost." She wanted to spit back, to curse, to remind him that this was her palace, her throne, her world. But none of those words could break through the gravity of the moment. So she stood still, gripping the edge of the table, nails digging into the crystal surface, her knuckles pale. A low hum vibrated through the floor, the sound of the Terran orbital network tightening its hold around the planet. Outside, the alien fleet still sat on its launch pads, paralyzed under Terran gravity locks. Their capital's communications had been reduced to a single frequency monitored by Terran AI. Their defense satellites were now sending encrypted codes back to Terran command instead of their own. And then, as if to remind her of just how powerless she truly was, every palace screen flickered to life with an image of her empire's military command center empty. Terran shock teams had already occupied it without resistance. It hadn't even made the news feeds because there was no fight to report. The alien girl's chest tightened, the walls around her seeming to close in. Her father's throne loomed behind her, massive and carved from the crystal bones of a starship that had once conquered entire systems. She had always believed it was unshakable. But now, in the presence of the Terran commander, it felt like a relic. Her people's strength was a myth, and she had been the one who believed in it the loudest. Her advisors began to rise from their seats, not to defend her, but to plead with the Terrans for mercy. The sight made her blood boil. "Cowards," she whispered through clenched teeth. But even as she said it, she felt the same cold fear twisting in her gut. The Terran commander finally spoke again, walking around the table with the slow patience of someone who already owned the room. "Your broadcasts were loud," he said. "Your words reached every corner of the council. You laughed at our warnings. You called us weak. But humanity doesn't bark." He stopped beside her, close enough for her to feel the controlled weight of his presence. "It acts." His voice wasn't raised, but it shook something deep inside her. Every alien in the room lowered their eyes. She stared at him, her jaw locked, fighting back the crack forming in her carefully built mask of pride. She wanted to hate him, but all she could feel was the reality she had refused to see. Outside, the alien people had gathered in the streets. The Terran fleet had shut down all external communication, but the images being broadcast from orbit were clear. The humans hadn't destroyed a single building. They hadn't set fire to their cities. They hadn't slaughtered anyone. But their presence alone had made the Empire bend. Crowds of civilians began kneeling, not because they were ordered to, but because something primal told them resistance would be like standing before a tidal wave. One Terran ship alone could cripple their entire planet. And hundreds of those ships now filled their skies. Humanity hadn't come to conquer. It had come to remind the galaxy that patience has limits. The alien girl turned back to her throne. All her life she had been raised to see it as a symbol of power. But now it just looked like a chair. A tall, empty chair that didn't belong to her anymore. The Terran commander followed her gaze. "This isn't about your throne," he said. "This is about the lesson you wanted." She spun around, her voice breaking. "I wanted respect," she shouted. "I wanted the galaxy to remember our name." He stared at her, unflinching. "They will," he said softly. "But not the way you hoped." Her breath caught. For the first time, the weight of everything she'd done hit her like a storm. She had mocked a predator, and now she was watching the jaws close. A sudden explosion of sound filled the air, not from weapons, but from the Terran orbital announcement system. It wasn't even loud, just a calm, steady broadcast played in every district, every station, every starship that once bore her empire's mark. It said only 4 words: "Respect is earned. Remember." The alien people fell into stunned silence. That message wasn't just to her. It was to the entire galaxy. Empires that had laughed at humanity would now hear this. And they would remember. The alien girl gripped the throne tightly, her nails scraping against the crystal. She had wanted to be the strongest voice in the galaxy. Now she was just a lesson in its history. The Terran commander placed his helmet back on, his soldiers shifting behind him like a single organism awaiting command. He didn't threaten. He didn't shout. He simply turned toward the throne room doors. "We don't want your world," he said as he walked away. "We just want you to understand who you picked to fight with." The echo of his boots grew fainter as he disappeared down the hall, leaving behind a silence she couldn't fill. For the first time in her life, the alien girl stood in her palace, surrounded by people who no longer believed in her power. And she felt very, very small. Outside, the night sky was painted black with Terran ships, their lights forming a constellation of quiet, merciless authority. The lesson wasn't finished. It had only begun. And every empire that had once dismissed humanity would be watching. This was no victory for her. It was the day the galaxy realized that mocking humanity was never a harmless game. It always had a price, and she had just paid it. The night sky over the capital world had turned completely black, swallowed whole by the Terran fleet's colossal presence. Thousands of warships floated silently above the planet, their hulls like jagged shadows carved into the stars. The alien girl stood by the shattered balcony of her palace, staring up at the endless formation of Terran ships blotting out the heavens. The air smelled like metal and fear. What terrified her wasn't fire or destruction. It was the stillness. Not a single ship moved without purpose. Not a single weapon was fired. Humanity didn't need chaos. It was the calm before a storm that didn't have to strike twice. And that silence told her one thing louder than words ever could. Humanity was already in control. Down below, the city that had once glowed with golden towers and silver streets now lay dim and quiet. Power grids remained down, their control centers absorbed into Terran command. Every transport, every drone, every satellite in orbit now obeyed a different hand. Terran boots moved through the avenues with clockwork precision, their patrols smooth and disciplined, as if they'd walked these streets 1,000 times before. The alien citizens watched them from behind shattered windows and balconies, whispering to one another with trembling voices. They had once believed the humans were scattered, fractured, weak. But what they saw now was unity forged in iron. A storm that didn't roar, it surrounded. The alien girl's hands trembled as she gripped the cold railing. She could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on her skin like a physical force. Behind her, the throne room was half dark, the glowing crystal walls flickering as Terran override signals rippled through their ancient architecture. Her generals and advisors huddled near the far end of the chamber, whispering nervously. Their proud uniforms were smeared with dust and sweat, their faces pale. The same men who had once laughed at Terran diplomats were now begging each other to find a way out of this nightmare. But there was no way out. Humanity had made sure of that. A sudden, low rumble shook the palace foundations as a new formation of Terran dreadnoughts entered orbit, their arrival lighting up the black sky for a brief moment like a metallic dawn. Every ship slid into position with flawless precision, as if an invisible hand moved them across the stars. The alien girl's pulse spiked. She could hear the panicked chatter of her remaining military officers through the palace comms. Terran forces had taken the orbital ring completely. They had landed shock teams in every major city. They had disabled the fleet without firing a single missile. Their empire's greatest strength, its size, had turned against them. Their infrastructure was too predictable, their systems too proud, their defenses designed for old wars. Humanity had studied every line, every code, every weakness. And now they moved like someone playing a game they had already won. The palace doors opened with a soft hiss, and the Terran commander walked in, flanked by 2 soldiers. The sound of their boots on the polished floor echoed through the throne room like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. He walked slowly, not because he needed to, but because he could. Each step was heavy with certainty. His armor caught the faint light, and the alien girl could see her reflection in his visor. Small, fragile, trembling. He stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to her throne. His soldiers didn't speak. They didn't raise their weapons. They simply stood there, silent sentinels of a power that didn't need to prove itself anymore. "Your world belongs to no one but its people," the commander said, his voice calm, deliberate, almost surgical. "But your power ends tonight." His words cut through the cold air like a blade. The alien girl clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice shaking despite her efforts. "You may have my palace, my fleets, my cities, but my people will never bow to you." He tilted his head slightly, not out of amusement, but out of a quiet kind of pity. "We don't need them to bow," he replied. "They already know who holds the sky." His soldiers stepped aside as a new holographic projection appeared in the center of the throne room. It was the planetary map of her world. Every defense point was marked in red, every city, every base, every station. One by one, the red markers faded to black. Terran units had secured them all. No fighting, no bloodbath, just overwhelming precision. Her throat tightened as she watched the last marker disappear. Her private fortress, the one she thought would hold out, gone too. The commander turned his visor back to her. "This," he said, gesturing to the map, "is what happens when arrogance mistakes patience for weakness." She stepped back instinctively, feeling her spine press against the crystal edge of the throne. Her mind raced through every speech she had given, every insult she had hurled at the Galactic Council, every broadcast where she mocked humanity. She had called them the forgotten children of a dying planet. She had said they lacked the elegance of empires. She had laughed when they warned her. But now she stood with her back against a throne that no longer meant anything, staring at a man who had said almost nothing, yet conquered everything. And she finally understood the weight of silence. The sound of distant engines filled the sky as Terran relief convoys began descending, not carrying soldiers, but supplies. Food, Water. Power units. They weren't burning her world. They were rebuilding it on their terms. Civilians who had spent the last hours in panic now watched Terran drones distribute aid. Humanity wasn't here to destroy a people. They were here to make them remember, to carve a lesson into their bones so deep it would echo through generations. Empires fall with explosions, but fear is born in silence. And this silence would outlive her reign. Her advisors finally stepped forward, faces pale, eyes hollow. "Princess," one whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's over." The words hit her like a physical blow. She wanted to shout at him, to accuse him of betrayal, to order him to stand and fight. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. There was nothing left to fight with. She had mocked a species that didn't need a war to win. She had challenged an empire that never needed to roar. And she had lost everything before the first shot was even fired. The Terran commander walked up the steps slowly, stopping just a few paces away from her. His shadow stretched over her, long and cold. She stared up at him, her silver-blue skin slick with sweat, her breath uneven. For a moment, she saw not a soldier but the reflection of her own downfall standing in front of her. "We warned you," he said quietly. "And still, you chose to make humanity your enemy." His voice wasn't cruel, but it was final, irrefutable. It felt less like a threat and more like a sentence already carried out. She wanted to spit back at him, to claw at him, to scream that she would never break. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was tremble as the reality of it all wrapped around her like chains. Outside, the fleet's lights blinked in perfect, synchronized silence. One species had brought her empire to its knees, not with noise, not with fury, but with cold, disciplined inevitability. And she, once the proud princess who thought she could defy the galaxy, stood powerless at the center of it all. The commander leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "History will remember this day," he said. "Not because you fought, but because you learned." He stepped back, turned, and descended the stairs with the same measured calm he had entered with. His soldiers followed without a word. She sank onto the edge of her throne, her breath shallow, her fingers digging into the cold crystal. Outside, the sky remained black, but it wasn't the darkness of war. It was the shadow of humanity's lesson, cast across an entire world. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet realization bloomed, a truth more terrifying than defeat itself. Humanity hadn't just taken her power. They had shown the galaxy that their silence was more dangerous than any empire's roar. And that truth would live far longer than her name. The black horizon stretched endlessly beyond the alien capital, the stars above drowned beneath the iron shadow of the Terran fleet. The alien girl sat alone on the cold edge of her crystal throne, her back straight, but her spirit collapsing inward like a dying star. The grand chamber that had once thundered with applause and pride was now silent. Terran soldiers stood along the perimeter of the room, unmoving, their presence alone heavier than any weapon. Their armor reflected the pale light that still flickered weakly through the power-starved palace. The empire she thought could never fall had already crumbled. Not through war, but through the quiet, disciplined hand of a species that had learned long ago how to win without shouting. Far above the city, the Terran flagship shifted slightly in orbit, its hull like a black blade drawn across the sky. It moved with the precision of a heartbeat, a rhythm that the alien world had now fallen in step with. Every transport, every comm channel, every power grid belonged to them. Civilian feeds showed Terran drones repairing infrastructure, distributing rations, restoring order with terrifying efficiency. And that was what made it unbearable. Humanity hadn't razed their cities. They had taken everything while leaving the walls standing, making sure the people would remember who owned the silence between breaths. It wasn't conquest that frightened her anymore. It was how easily they had made her empire irrelevant. The palace balcony doors opened with a faint hiss as the Terran commander entered once more. He didn't need guards now. His soldiers stayed outside because no one dared lift a hand against him. Not anymore. The alien girl turned slowly, her silver-blue skin pale against the dim light. Her once fiery eyes were ringed with sleepless darkness. Her voice had screamed itself hoarse in the hours after the occupation, shouting at her advisors, the council, the stars themselves. But nothing she said could unmake the quiet weight pressing down on her world. He walked with the same calm he always had, each step steady, slow, inevitable. This man didn't walk like a conqueror. He walked like someone who already knew history had chosen his side. "You're quiet," he said simply, his voice calm. Even, she glared at him with what little fire she had left. But the sound of her own heartbeat was louder than the anger in her chest. "Do you expect me to kneel?" she spat bitterly. The commander tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "No," he said. "We didn't come for that." The words hit her like cold water. He didn't need her to bow. Humanity didn't need her submission. They already had her entire empire bent beneath their silence. Her kneeling wouldn't change anything, and somehow that was worse than if he had demanded it. He walked past her, stopping at the balcony. From there, the entire capital stretched below them, blanketed in the soft red of Terran landing lights. Columns of armored soldiers moved through the streets like rivers of black steel. Terran engineering drones climbed the walls of towers, sealing cracks, reinforcing structures, laying down their own quiet marks. A world once proud and loud now moved in rhythm with a foreign heartbeat. She followed him to the balcony, her steps slow, her body heavy with something she had never felt before. Not fear, not hatred, something deeper, something colder. The crushing knowledge that she had built her power on sand and it had all washed away in a single tide. "Look at them," the commander said, gesturing toward the city. "Your people aren't fighting. They're watching. They're realizing that everything they believed in depended on you being right. And you weren't." His words were quiet, but each one was a weight she couldn't deflect. Her hands clenched against the railing. "You could have burned everything," she whispered. "You could have slaughtered us. But you didn't." He turned to her then, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes. Not cruelty, not victory, but something harder. Resolve. "Destruction is easy," he said. "Teaching is harder. And lessons last longer than ashes." She flinched as if struck. She had always believed humanity to be loud, desperate, weak. Just another species clawing at the edges of the stars. But this wasn't desperation. This was control. Terrans didn't scream their strength. They let it settle over a world like nightfall. Slow, unstoppable, inevitable. Her people had never faced an enemy like this before. Empires fought with fire and speeches. Humanity fought with silence and results. Far in the distance, the sky lit up briefly as the Terran orbital network synchronized. Massive projectors spread a single symbol into the heavens, a silver insignia that pulsed like a heartbeat. It wasn't a flag of conquest. It was a reminder, a single message broadcast to every system in the Galactic Council. Respect is earned. Defiance is answered. The entire galaxy would see it. Every species that had laughed at humanity would feel the cold ripple of that message. Empires built on arrogance would remember this day. And she would forever be the name tied to that moment. The alien girl pressed her hands to the railing, staring down at the thousands of Terran soldiers moving like black rivers through her capital. "You came here to break me," she said softly. "No," the commander answered. "You broke yourself. We're just here to make sure you don't forget." His voice wasn't cruel, but it was merciless in its honesty. Her chest tightened, a knot of rage and helplessness twisting deep inside. She wanted to hate him, to hate his people, but a part of her, the part she could never admit, understood exactly why this happened. She had thrown the first insult. She had mocked the wolf thinking it was a lamb. And now the wolf had walked calmly into her house and taken the throne without a single growl. A broadcast flickered to life above the city. A wide feed projected across every street and district. It showed the council chamber light years away, alien representatives watching with pale faces as humanity stood at the center, silent and unbending. No threats, no negotiations, just proof. The alien girl watched as her name was spoken in fearful whispers across the stars. Not as a leader, not as a hero, as a warning. The kind that becomes a line in history books, a name children will one day learn not as a figure of power, but as the fool who underestimated humanity. The commander turned away from the balcony and walked back toward the throne. She followed without meaning to, like gravity itself pulled her along. He stopped at the base of the throne, looking up at the towering crystal seat where generations of her bloodline had ruled. "This chair isn't power," he said. "Power isn't where you sit. It's what you can hold when the stars turn against you. And you couldn't hold anything." She stared at the throne. For the first time it looked small, fragile, a monument to arrogance. She had thought it was the universe's center. Humanity had shown her it was barely a footnote. A deep, resonant tone echoed through the palace. The Terran fleet signaling the completion of planetary lockdown. The occupation was absolute. Not a single fleet, weapon, or system remained outside their grasp. She had lost her empire not in a war, but in a moment of silence. And the silence was louder than any war cry ever could have been. Her knees felt weak, her chest tight, but she refused to fall. She refused to give them that. But inside, she already knew. This moment would outlive her throne, outlive her entire bloodline. The commander paused at the doorway, turning back one last time. "This is your world," he said. "We don't need to rule it. You'll do that for us." The meaning of his words slid under her skin like ice. He wasn't taking her throne. He was letting her keep it under the weight of their shadow. She would rule, but as a reminder of who truly held the sky. And that was far more terrifying than conquest. He left, his footsteps fading into the endless quiet. She stood alone in the throne room, surrounded by her advisors who no longer dared speak, by guards who no longer dared raise their weapons. Outside, her world moved to the silent rhythm of a new power. And as she stared at the black sky, at the endless line of Terran ships, she understood the final truth. Humanity hadn't just won. Humanity had made history bend around them. And her name would be carved into that history forever. Not as a victor, not as a leader, but as the day the galaxy learned what happens when you provoke a silent storm.